Okay, so my screen should be sharing. Today's Calico Connect session is all around Kubernetes network policies and showing you how easy it is to kind of develop, deploy, test them out with Calico. So what you can see here is sort of my terminal window. I've got a cluster running locally at the moment, and I do have some network policies in this cluster. But if you want to kind of know what policies you've got inside your cluster, it can be quite, not necessarily difficult to find them, but it can be quite tedious to find them. So I've done one command here now just to sort of get my Calico network policies. You can see that I've got 4. I don't know if I've got any sort of Kubernetes network policies. Looks like I do. I might even have some global network policies. So even just doing this, if I wanted to sort of troubleshoot, go and find out what my policies are up to, if they're blocking traffic, what rules they have inside them, it can be quite a convoluted process to figure that out. So I've already ran 3 different commands. I could probably run a few more to find out what policies are currently active inside my cluster. And even then, I wouldn't necessarily know which order these policies are getting applied in, or if any of these policies are actively blocking traffic, maybe they're allowing traffic, etc. So even starting to write network policies from scratch, I quite often hear people that aren't using network policies aren't doing it because it can be quite complicated, can be quite time consuming to get all of these set up. And then it becomes harder to manage and just sort of keep an eye on them, update them, etc. So what I'm going to be showing you today is Calico and how Calico can make it a lot easier for anyone who's sort of needing to use network policies or even start creating them. So even all of these policies that you see here, I've already created them. If you were to kind of begin the process from scratch and start creating them, that's where you need to kind of know, well, for one, how to build a network policy and kind of what that sort of the template looks like, how to build those rules, how to choose the selectors, etc. And even then, if you're going down to sort of like a workload isolation level, what are those pods or services communicating with each other over? So what ports, what protocols, etc. And then if you're putting a policy on each individual workload, you need to know exactly what traffic is expected to come in, to go out, and then you're building a lot of policies. So I guess also while I'm here, if anyone here is sort of newer to Calico network policies, Calico kind of extends what you get natively from Kubernetes with network policies. So we have explicit actions, so you can allow, deny, log, and pass your traffic. You have the option to create global network policies. So that applies cluster-wide then, not just specific to a namespace. Whereas Kubernetes network policies, when you create them, just the normal network policies, they're all namespace scoped and you're specifying namespace in there. With the Calico global network policies, they will apply to every sort of namespace in your whole cluster, or you can add selectors to select multiple namespaces at once or exclude a few namespaces, which can make it easier, especially if you're doing things like default deny policies. Maybe you're setting policies up to block access to sort of malicious, dangerous IP addresses or domains that you don't want them to access. You can do that all in one policy and target multiple namespaces at once instead of creating a namespace policy or a network policy for every single namespace that you have, and making that quite repetitive. And Calico also gives you the option to group policies into tiers. So you can see these are all the policy names here, sort of after the full stop. Before them are all the tiers. So Calico lets you group policies into tiers, which is better for organizing, visualizing, which we'll see in a moment, and also just helping set the order and the precedence of those policies. So in this case, you can see this cluster that I have has a few different tiers. I've got an app CatFacts tier. That's where I've put all of the policies that relate to my CatFacts application in that tier. I've also got a security tier and a platform tier. So a lot of larger organizations where they might have dedicated security teams, platform teams, etc. We recommend setting up those tiers sort of first with the highest order so that anything in the security tier, any of those policies will get evaluated first. And that's where you can see things like you're blocking egress access to embargoed countries, let's say, or you've got your compliance requirements in here. And then the platform team might have policies that come after the security tier and what the security team wants to, what sort of controls the security team wants to implement in the cluster. And the platform team might have some more that are more related to making sure that the cluster stays up and running. So allowing access to kubedns, for example. So allowing access on port 53. And then after that, that's when you can start to have your sort of namespace isolation policies, your application specific policy tiers before a default tier, which comes last. One of the other things that Calico Network Policies allows you to do is also stage your policies. So quite often we'll see people who are sort of building network policies, and obviously, hopefully you're not doing this in production, but if you're doing this and you want to sort of test an application out before you enforce policies and potentially break things if they're misconfigured, staging policies allows you to sort of pretend to implement the policy. So Calico will start collecting log files that will show you if traffic between two pods or a namespace, etc., would have been impacted by a staged policy and what the outcome of that staged policy would have been. So you can kind of test your network policies as well before you enforce them. So they're not actually altering traffic flows until they're enforced. So I'll start with Calico Cloud today. Hopefully this is my right cluster. But then I'll also show you some of the functionality that we have in our Calico Cloud free tier and Calico Whisker, which was recently released just a couple weeks ago, I believe. So if you're not an existing commercial customer, you can still get a lot of the functionality that I'm going to show you today in the Calico Cloud free tier and all of the log files that I'm going to show you in Calico Whisker. And I guess some housekeeping that I forgot to mention in the beginning. This is being recorded, so you will get a copy of the recording afterwards. And if you have any questions, use the chat box window that you can see. I probably won't notice if any questions come in the Q&A tab. So I do have one question now. That if does using Calico in your cluster mean that it's getting managed in the Calico Cloud here, or could it be completely locked into our environment? So this Calico Cloud here, this isn't the cluster that I have, but actually it'll have some pods in here. You'll see that when you connect to sort of Calico Cloud or Calico Cloud free tier, a lot of the things that are sort of managing Calico, we will see inside your clusters. They get installed in your cluster. So you've got all these Calico system namespace, you've got a Calico API server namespace. This contains all of the pods that sort of keep Calico working and managed. And then these will all be communicating and sort of sending data back to Calico Cloud, which is a SaaS service. There is also an option for Calico Enterprise. So then that would still install the things inside your cluster, but you would be keeping it locally. So you would have the UI hosted sort of locally, and it would just access your cluster like that. So if you had a lockdown environment, Calico Enterprise would be the way to go. But everything that I'm going to show you today would be the same, or sort of look the same functionality-wise as you would in Calico Enterprise versus Calico Cloud. So when it comes to sort of starting off, you've got to start building network policies. You want to build them correctly, ideally, so that you don't cause application outages, any downtime when you enforce misconfigured policies. So this is our service graph. And whenever Calico is installed in a cluster, it is collecting flow logs for all of the communication that's going on inside your cluster. So actually you can see this at the bottom here. These are all of the flow logs for this cluster. So It's tracking where communication is going, where it's going to, what the namespace is, what the ports, protocols, etc. And you can expand all of this for more information. And it also has things like the labels. So this will come in handy when writing your policies too, because you want to use that identity-based sort of framework for writing policies. So instead of using IP addresses, which you might do in more traditional firewalls, in a network policy, you'll be sort of targeting pods via the labels. So the flow logs capture the labels, and as well as all of the policies that are applied to a specific flow. So based on all of these flow logs that Calico is capturing, it starts to build this visualization of all communication within your cluster. So I can hide the Tigera components because they're not what I'm managing. Yes, let's hide all of this. Make it a little bit cleaner. So you can see now a little bit easier some of the applications that I've installed in this cluster. So I've got a pets namespace that has an application in. I've got a hipster shop namespace which has some applications in. And then I can see all of these lines going across the service graph, which is indicating how they're communicating. So you can see that there's communication here from the pets namespace. Something inside that namespace is talking to kube system, probably for the sort of DNS lookups. Something from the private network is going to the pets namespace. And then if I go inside one of these namespaces just by double clicking, you can actually see all the different microservices that make up that namespace and how they're communicating with each other. So some of the applications that I've installed just to keep generating traffic and load to kind of make flow logs. We've got a virtual customer that's using this pet shop. We've got virtual workers who are going in there and processing those orders from the virtual customers. And then you can see that the virtual worker is communicating with the make line service, it's going to kube system, and the virtual customer is going to the order service, which is then going to a backend database. So if I was going to start writing network policies to secure this, I can click on any of these lines between the two sort of objects on here. I get insight, so I can see that it's going over TCP port 3000 for that one. Click on this one, you've got 5672. So now when I'm building my policy, I would know that if I'm writing a rule to sort of secure communication to, let's say, RabbitMQ, I know that I'm going to allow ingress access over port TCP port 5672, and I'll only allow it from the order service. So I'll go and find out what the labels are on the order service and then use those when I'm writing my policy. So if I click on that line here, again, going into the flow logs, I could find the source labels. So if I was writing this policy on the RabbitMQ side and I was selecting this and then writing an ingress rule to allow from the order service, I would build that rule up to say traffic is allowed over that port from something that has the app equals order service label, for example, and then maybe comes from within that pet's namespace. And then if I was doing this on the order service side, I would build an egress rule. So traffic is allowed out over 5672. And then I would use these destination labels. So traffic would be allowed out to something in the pet's namespace. And if it didn't already have a label on there for sort of like RabbitMQ or database or something, I could make sure it was labeled and then use that in my network policy. So the flow logs and the service graph start to give you a lot of information that can help make writing your network policies a lot easier. And in an environment like mine, where I've already got some network policies created, instead of running all of those sort of kubectl commands to try and get all of my network policies, maybe even doing a describe to figure out what each policy is doing, Calico gives you a policies board, which you can see here, which has every single policy that's applied to your cluster visible on here. And you can see that they are organized into those tiers that I was talking about. So it makes it a lot easier to just visualize the order that your policies are getting evaluated in. So anything in the security tier is getting evaluated before the platform tier, app stars, app pets, for example. And then within each tier, policies get evaluated top down. So it kind of moves like that for policy evaluation through your cluster. And then what this is also a really good view for is seeing how much traffic is either being allowed or denied by each policy. So you can see from my app stars, most of these policies look like they're targeting one endpoint. There's traffic being allowed through, nothing going wrong. So that's probably not something I need to really worry about. But I do have policies on the policies board that are sort of highlighted in red. And you can see that these policies aren't actually targeting any endpoints at the moment. So that would be something I'd have to go in and sort of reevaluate. Is this policy still useful? Did I set up the selectors wrong so it's not actually targeting any endpoints? Or should I just delete it? So I can go in and either fix it or delete it. And as well, if you've got policies that are denying traffic, again, they get highlighted in red and you'll see sort of in a red font here, the volume of traffic that is being denied by these policies. So then again, you could go in, let's say for this CatFacts namespace isolation policy, probably want to be allowing traffic that I expect and trust into this CatFacts namespace. If I've got some denied traffic going on here and I'm just sort of in the process of testing my application, probably means I haven't necessarily set up the rules for that policy correctly. So I would want to go in and just double check those rules and update them before I then enforce that policy. So you can see at the moment, all of these namespace isolation policies are staged. So no traffic would actually be getting blocked to my CatFacts application, but it would be a good way for me to sort of test, have a look at that CatFacts policy, maybe go back to the service graph and look through some of the flow logs in the CatFacts namespace, and then see which policies were denying traffic, and then go and update the rules. And this one isn't denying traffic anymore. So this probably isn't the best example, but you can see clicking on a policy in here, it shows me whether the traffic is allowed or denied for each rule. So if I had messed up one of the rules for this policy and that was the one that was causing the denied traffic, we would see that it would show for a specific rule that it was denying traffic. So it becomes a lot easier to sort of troubleshoot and narrow down which policy is causing issues or denying traffic, and then within that, exactly which rule is denying traffic. So it becomes a lot easier to kind of troubleshoot and make sure your policies are targeting and having the right impact on traffic flows. And as well, you can edit policies through the UI here. So if you prefer sort of more visual tools like this, kind of guides you through setting up the scope of your policy, what it applies to. You can choose more selectors in here. And again, building your rules in a similar way. So you get a little pop-up here for my ingress rule. I can choose what I want it to match, set up my selectors, and just sort of build my rules using the visual interface. And then you can also as well click on a policy once it's been saved in the UI, and it will show you what the YAML manifest looks like. So if you're newer to network policies, creating them through the Calico UI can be a good sort of start. You can kind of build it fairly easily and then look at how that is created in a YAML manifest. And then you could go on and use this as a template or sort of use this in your CI/CD pipelines if that's what you're doing. And you can also see a difference here too. So if I've changed a policy, you can compare them. So if you've got multiple people going in here, maybe a policy was working, suddenly it stopped working, you can easily compare the difference between applied policies, see what changed, and then see what needs to be fixed. And we also do have as well in here a few dashboards. So once your policies are already set up and you're kind of more in the monitoring stage, making sure traffic is sort of allowed as expected, that's when you can start to just kind of use dashboards and things for monitoring. So you can see here I've got this cluster view. This would then show me if traffic was starting to be denied. And if it was, I could then click on the sort of like red R in the chart and it would take me to a specific policy. So you can use these for sort of more streamlined monitoring once your network policies are already set up. And we do also have some tools in Calico just to make creating policies easier. So this time, if I click on policies, instead of going to my policies board, I can go to policy recommendations. And again, based on the flow logs that I kind of showed you, with the service graph. Based on all of those logs for each namespace, Calico is kind of gathering and sort of aggregating all that data and starting to build you a policy recommendation, which would be a namespace isolation policy and kind of be that first line of defense for your namespace. So based on those flow logs, it's sort of learning and seeing what traffic is coming into or out of that namespace. So you can see for this WordPress namespace that I have with a sort of sample WordPress application in, you can see that it's allowing traffic in over port 80. Traffic from within the WordPress namespace is allowed to kind of talk to itself within this namespace over port 80 or 3306. And you can see how it's starting to build up those rules, add in the label selectors based on all of the information it's collecting from the flow logs. And this will sort of keep learning from the flow logs unless you choose to add it. So if you then add it to your policies board and go and confirm, we should see that appear in our namespace isolation tier. Got that WordPress policy here. And all of those policies start off as staged. And this gives you time to go and sort of test out the policy, check the logs, make sure it's working as expected. Or you can go in there and sort of tweak the rules if you need to. So this makes it a lot faster for people to kind of get started with the security posture, at least securing the sort of perimeter of your namespaces. And then we also have another tool in here. So you can see I don't actually have any policies for that pets namespace that I showed you in the service graph. So if I wanted to start creating a policy for every single service that I have in there, I could click on recommend a policy. I will go and find that pets namespace and go to advanced options. And we were talking about RabbitMQ, so I'll choose RabbitMQ and then get it to recommend me a policy. So based on the flow logs for the last 15 minutes, it's giving me these labels. So I'll just leave app equals RabbitMQ. It's built me one ingress policy rule. So that's allowing access from the order service over port 5672. And that lines up with what we were looking at on the service graph a few minutes ago. And then I've got the name RabbitMQ, that's fine. And then I'll stage that policy, go back to my policies board. It will put them in the default tier to begin with, but then I can just drag it across. I'll do it one by one. There we go. Oh, there we go. Drag it across to my app pets. And you can see that I did that in a matter of seconds. Whereas if I was going into sort of my editor, writing that YAML manifest from scratch or even from a template, that would take me a little bit longer. Now I have a policy that's already created with the right rules in. I can download the YAML manifest if I want to and kind of use that to start working. So Calico can make it a lot easier and faster to get your network policies in place within your cluster. And so as we only have a few minutes left, I'll show you the Calico Cloud free tier and Calico Whisker. So I'll start with Whisker actually. So all of those flow logs that I mentioned, Calico is collecting. If you're using Calico 3.30, so Calico Open Source 3.30, it now comes with Whisker. So you'll be able to sort of bring up this UI that's connected to your cluster and start to view all the flow logs. So Whisker collects 12 hours worth of flow logs. You can do the filtering here. You can also filter by policy. So if you've applied a policy and you want to kind of check the flow logs, make sure it's not denying any traffic, check that it's targeting the right services, you can add filters by policies. And again, just like in Calico Cloud, you get a list of all the policies that are acting on that flow. So you can go in there and assess which policies were potentially responsible for denying the traffic. Then you would go back to sort of command line terminal or the YAML file and then edit and update your policy that way. With the Calico Cloud free tier, you still get access to the flow logs. This time you would get access to 24 hours worth of flow logs compared to Whisker, which gives you 12 hours. And then Calico Open Source, Calico Cloud, Calico Enterprise, I believe give you up to like 7 days worth of logs. So in here with Calico Cloud, most of it is view only, but you can still view the service graph. You can still very clearly see if traffic is being denied, how it's communicating across your cluster. The flow logs will auto filter based on sort of the flow lines that you're clicking on. And you still have access to the policies board. Again, this is read only or sort of like a view only. So this will show you any policies that you've applied via the command line. And that's why you will create your policies and create your tiers is via the command line. But you'll be able to visualize and view them here. You can see which ones are denying traffic, if they're staged, etc. So it still is a lot easier and faster than just running a lot of those sort of kubectl get commands over and over again. And then policy recommendations, I believe. This is the sort of dev version of Calico Cloud free tier. So I'm not sure if policy recommendations in the current released one or will be coming very soon. But then you can enable this, and again, you get access to the policy recommendations that I just showed you, as well as a select few dashboards for sort of monitoring once you've got your policy set up. And then Calico Cloud free tier lets you connect to one cluster, whereas with Calico Cloud or Calico Enterprise, you've got multiple clusters in here that you can just quickly swap between to manage. So, so let me just check on the questions here, as we've pretty much got a couple minutes left. So can we apply this to virtual machines? I actually think, yeah, so Calico does do sort of host endpoint protection, or does help, does apply policies to VMs. Actually, this is one of the links that I have in the docs tab in Goldcast. I did add a link to the sort of hands-on lab workshops. We do have one here, sort of running a virtual machine in a Kubernetes environment. I didn't make this one, but it could be worth looking into, as well as in our documentation. So I added a link to our microsegmentation use case, which is part of the Calico documentation. But you could have a look in here, like do a search for VMs, and you should be able to see how you can apply policies to VM endpoints as well. And then, yeah, so would Whisker be the sort of free tier way for us to dig into view policy blocks via something we can self-host? You'd recommend that over using the CLI. So yeah, so this is actually, this cluster I'm just running locally at the moment using Kind. So this is a different cluster to the one I have connected into Calico Cloud, but this is the cluster I have connected to Calico Cloud free tier and Whisker. So you can see here actually that the Whisker is sort of running inside this local cluster, and then I'm just accessing the Whisker UI over localhost, so just to the cluster that it's running inside there. So this is definitely an easier way if you're building policies and you want to know how things are communicating, so you can filter by namespace. So for CatFacts, I can see all of the flows that from my CatFacts namespace, and then build policies for those. And then again, I would still be able to go into Whisker after I've applied those policies and sort of test them and validate them. If you want more visualizations and things like service graph, you want to actually be able to visualize all of your policies, that's where Calico Cloud free tier would come in. And then you would just sort of run a few commands in your local cluster that would then go and connect it to the Calico Cloud free tier. But you can use Whisker and Calico Cloud free tier in the same cluster. So it just depends, I guess, what you're needing. So yeah, we're pretty much on time now. So if there are any more questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. And in the meantime, what I'll do is just launch a quick survey, 7 questions, just to get some feedback on this event. Hopefully you found it useful. But this is your chance to tell us in the survey if there's anything we can improve on, if you did find it useful, etc. So the survey hopefully should have popped up on your screen. In the meantime, I will turn off my webcam and just wait, see if any questions come in, and I'll answer them. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending today, and hopefully see you at another one again soon.